Prince William did not need to accuse anyone by name. According to the royal claim now spreading online, all he had to do was place two versions of the same schedule beside each other and ask King Charles one question: which one did you approve? The first version reduced the king's travel, transferred selected events to William, and created more recovery time between major appearances. The second kept Charles at the center of almost everything. One paragraph was missing. 3 duties had moved back to the king, and the recommendation explaining why William should step in had simply disappeared. If those papers were genuine, the problem was no longer whether Charles wanted to keep working. It was whether he had been given the full advice before making that choice. Somewhere between the medical recommendation, the scheduling office, and the king's desk, the meaning had allegedly changed. The version that protected Charles's health became the version that protected the appearance of complete control. And the office now being placed under suspicion was the one closest to him, Queen Camilla's. That allegation creates a conflict the palace could never resolve with an ordinary statement. If Camilla was only protecting her husband's privacy, William's investigation would look like an intrusion into the king's medical life. If she was delaying information that might move responsibilities toward the heir, privacy would have become a shield for influence. Charles would be forced to choose between the wife who supported him through illness and the son expected to protect the next reign. William would be forced to prove that concern for his father was not ambition for the crown. The story becomes compelling because none of those motives has to begin with cruelty. Charles has waited almost his entire life to carry the responsibilities of sovereign. After decades of preparation, being advised to step back from visible duties could feel less like medical caution and more like the beginning of an ending. His instinct would be to continue. Camilla, watching the purpose and determination that work gave him, might believe that keeping his program stable was part of keeping him strong. William could look at the same program and see a father being asked to prove his strength every day in public. That is the first argument the viral story asks the audience to judge. Is duty helping Charles endure treatment, or is duty becoming the reason he cannot rest? The answer matters because a monarchy does not operate like a normal family business. When the king appears, the appearance carries constitutional and national meaning. When William replaces him, even temporarily, the photograph becomes a picture of succession. Every transferred engagement may be medically practical, yet emotionally it can feel like authority moving before the current sovereign is ready. According to the allegation, William first became uneasy not because one event remained on Charles's diary, but because nearly every important proposal produced the same result. A demanding reception stayed with the king. A visit that could have been divided between father and son remained concentrated around Charles. Suggestions that William begin preparation were returned with language such as further consideration required or the king wishes to maintain continuity. The explanations sounded reasonable individually. Together, they began to look like a system designed to postpone change. Catherine allegedly noticed the effect before William described the cause. She saw him comparing schedules late at night, checking dates against public announcements, and asking why his office was learning about decisions only after they had effectively been settled. She could understand why he hesitated. A son asking to take work from an ill father can easily be portrayed as impatient. A future king demanding access to medical recommendations can sound like a man measuring how close he is to power. The only safe approach was to make the issue about process rather than personalities. William's concern, in the strongest version of the story, was not that Camilla personally wrote every amendment. It was that information connected to the king's health and workload allegedly passed through a structure in which her office could delay, summarize, or reshape what other teams saw. That difference is crucial. A queen supporting her husband may reasonably be involved in planning around his health, but no private office should be able to become the only route through which the heir understands whether he must prepare to carry more responsibility. The viral account claims William quietly asked for the original recommendations. He did not demand private diagnostic detail or the name of every treatment. He wanted the operational advice. How much travel was considered sensible? How many long events could be placed together? And which duties could be shared? The responses were said to be vague. Some papers arrived late, others appeared only as summaries. One recommendation was supposedly described to his team without the section that proposed William as the alternative host. At this point, the allegation offers its most effective mystery. Was someone deliberately removing William, or were cautious officials protecting the king from a premature transition narrative? Palace teams know that one careless line can become a headline claiming Charles is unable to reign. A draft recommending William for several appearances might be rewritten simply because the king later felt able to attend. A medical note could be shortened to protect confidentiality. A scheduling change could reflect security, government advice, or the preferences of an overseas host. The same differences that look sinister in a dramatic video might have ordinary explanations. But ordinary explanations become harder to accept when the pattern always benefits the same position. If every uncertain duty returns to Charles, the current household remains central. If William is repeatedly excluded from preparation, the future household remains dependent. Camilla's critics would say that the structure preserved her influence by preserving Charles's visible dominance. Her defenders would say that William's office was interpreting loyalty as obstruction because it expected a transition that the king had never authorized. Charles would be the only person capable of resolving the argument, and that is exactly why bringing it to him would be so dangerous. If William accused Camilla without complete evidence, Charles could see the confrontation as a revival of old hostility connected to Diana. If he stayed silent, he could later be blamed for allowing concerns about the king's health to remain buried. William needed something stronger than suspicion. A clear difference between what advisors originally proposed and what his father believed he had approved. The story, therefore, introduces a long-serving official who allegedly kept earlier drafts. Not a spy, not a dramatic outsider, but someone responsible for moving papers between offices. This person supposedly noticed that health-based recommendations were repeatedly softened before the final schedules were circulated. He kept copies because he feared the changes might later be described as routine misunderstandings. When his own position became uncertain, he decided the heir should see the sequence for himself. That element is designed to feel believable because institutions often reveal their secrets through ordinary records rather than dramatic confessions. An email timestamp can matter more than a shouted accusation. A missing paragraph can be more dangerous than a leaked speech. If the original drafts showed that the king's doctors or senior advisors recommended sharing work, and later versions removed that recommendation before Charles saw it, William would not need to speculate about motives. He would only need to establish who authorized the changes. Catherine's alleged advice was simple. Do not confront Camilla first. Do not allow the story to become William against his stepmother. Put the drafts in order, take them to Charles, and ask whether the final versions reflected his decision. That strategy would keep the king at the center of his own reign. It would also force him to consider the possibility that decisions carrying his name were being shaped before they reached him. The imagined meeting is quiet because quietness makes it more credible. William does not arrive demanding power. Charles does not immediately defend his wife. The papers are placed together. The king reads the original recommendation, then the final schedule. He sees one event reassigned to William and then returned to himself. He sees a proposed rest period removed. He sees language suggesting that the heir begin preparation for an overseas program, followed by a final version that lists Charles alone. The emotional question would no longer be whether the king was capable. It would be whether someone had decided that he should not be allowed to consider help. Camilla's defense, if the allegation were true, could still be powerful. She might say that early drafts were never decisions. She might argue that medical advisors recommend caution while the sovereign weighs wider obligations. She could insist that Charles knew his own strength and wanted to avoid a public narrative of decline. Her office might have coordinated the documents because she was the person living closest to the reality of his treatment, fatigue, and recovery. William could answer that proximity is not permission to control the information. A wife may understand the patient, but the monarchy also needs an informed heir. If Charles chose to maintain the program after reading complete advice, William would accept the decision. What he could not accept was the possibility that advice was being narrowed before the king and heir could discuss it. That is where Charles would face the cruelest choice. Defending Camilla might protect their marriage, but damage confidence in his judgment. Siding with William might protect the institution while telling his wife that her efforts to defend him had crossed into control. There would be no outcome without personal injury. The viral version wants the confrontation to end with a dramatic transfer. Charles declares William ready, removes Camilla from scheduling decisions, and moves the monarchy toward the next reign. That is the moment the thumbnail promises. It is also the moment where the evidence has to be examined far more carefully. No authenticated schedules have been published showing that Queen Camilla removed Prince William from royal duties. No identified palace employee has produced original and altered documents. No official statement confirms that William investigated his father's medical information or that Charles discovered his decisions were being filtered. The dramatic account supplies precise meetings, private motives, and a whistleblower without showing how any of those details were verified. The public record presents a far less explosive picture. Charles disclosed his cancer diagnosis in February 2024 and temporarily postponed public-facing duties while continuing state business and official paperwork. He later returned to visible work. In December 2025, he said his treatment schedule could be reduced in the new year, crediting early diagnosis, treatment, and following medical advice. By July 2026, the official court circular continued recording engagements by the King, the Queen, William, and Catherine, rather than a sudden transfer of the majority of royal duties. The royal diary also does not publish a complete program for the entire second half of the year. Official engagements are generally listed only up to 8 weeks ahead. That matters because the competitor story treats a supposedly complete long-term schedule as the first piece of evidence. A document that the public system does not normally provide in that form cannot be verified simply by saying William studied it at Kensington Palace. The official record in July 2026 shows Charles visiting Oxford, appearing with Camilla at London Zoo, carrying out meetings, traveling to the Isle of Man, and being scheduled with the Queen to open the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. William was simultaneously carrying out his own program, including visits connected with homelessness, mental health, communities, and Commonwealth sport. The picture is one of overlapping work, not an announced handover caused by secret files. That does not prove every private scheduling decision is free from tension. It does show why the claim should not be presented as established fact. There is also no published rule giving the Prince of Wales automatic access to the King's complete medical reports. William clearly needs enough operational information to prepare for duties he may be asked to undertake. That is different from a routine right to private clinical files. Medical information belongs to the patient, even when the patient is sovereign. The palace must balance confidentiality with constitutional readiness, and that balance will naturally leave parts of the process outside public view. The constitutional backup system is more structured than the alleged family investigation suggests. If the king is temporarily unable to perform certain royal functions because of illness or absence, 2 or more counselors of state can be appointed by letters patent. The current pool includes Queen Camilla and Prince William, as well as other eligible royals, with working members used in practice. They can perform many routine functions, though some core powers cannot be delegated. A regency would require something far more serious than a demanding diary or visible tiredness. Under the statutory framework, incapacity is formally declared through a process involving at least 3 of 5 specified office holders: the sovereign spouse, the Lord Chancellor, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Lord Chief Justice, and the Master of the Rolls. William would generally become regent if qualified, but he does not personally trigger the process by obtaining a hidden medical file. That fact changes the alleged power struggle. Camilla is not merely a private gatekeeper standing outside the Constitution. As the sovereign's spouse, she has a recognized role in the regency structure. William is the heir who would assume most royal functions during a regency, yet the decision is deliberately distributed among family, government, parliament, and senior judges. The law prevents one household from privately declaring victory over another. The real tension is therefore not a secret coup. It is how much responsibility Charles should carry while receiving treatment, how much William should absorb before the king asks him to, and how much influence Camilla should have over the process, because she is both queen and wife. Camilla may genuinely believe that purpose protects Charles from becoming defined by illness. William may genuinely believe that love is making the household underestimate the cost of his workload. Charles may see both forms of concern as pressure, one urging him forward, the other asking him to accept limits. Catherine may worry that a sudden expansion of William's role would affect their children and her own carefully managed return to public life. All four interests can clash without any person secretly altering a medical document. The monarchy's greatest risk is not necessarily that someone hides one report. It is that unclear boundaries allow suspicion to replace trust. If William's office does not know why duties are assigned, it may assume deliberate exclusion. If Camilla's office believes every request for information is a challenge to Charles, it may become overly defensive. If the king refuses help because he fears the symbolism, advisors may avoid honest conversations. A system built on private understanding can appear stable until the relationships inside it stop trusting one another. The most credible reform would not be a public humiliation of Camilla. It would be a clearer process. Medical advice could remain private, while operational recommendations are shared directly with the officials responsible for scheduling. Drafts could record who approved major changes. William could receive early notice when he might need to substitute. Charles could retain the final decision wherever his constitutional role permits it. Camilla could support her husband without becoming the sole route through which information moves. Such a system would protect everyone. It would protect Charles from having his wishes exaggerated. It would protect Camilla from unsupported accusations that she controls the succession. It would protect William from being portrayed as impatient when he prepares for work. It would protect the public from relying on invented files to understand whether the monarchy is ready for an emergency. The story remains highly clickable because it converts a difficult transition into a simple confrontation. William finds the truth, Camilla loses control, and Charles chooses his heir. Real life will almost certainly be slower and more ambiguous. Charles can remain king while William does more. Camilla can remain queen while having no constitutional power to control the next reign. Catherine can support the future crown without demanding that the present one disappear. There may never be one announcement declaring that Charles has picked William. The line of succession already determines who follows him. What Charles can choose is how responsibly he prepares the institution, how openly he accepts support, and whether the offices around him communicate clearly enough to prevent family concern from becoming constitutional suspicion. William's most important test is equally subtle. He must be ready without appearing eager. He must protect his father without treating him as incapable. He must challenge poor process without turning old wounds involving Camilla into the explanation for every disagreement. If he succeeds, the transition will look calm precisely because the difficult work happened before a crisis. Camilla's test is whether protection can remain protection. A spouse naturally wants to shield an ill partner from pressure and speculation, but the Queen's office cannot be seen as deciding what the heir or senior advisors are permitted to know about operational readiness. The closer she is to Charles, the more important it becomes that major scheduling decisions can be traced to the king and the proper officials, rather than assumed to reflect her private preference. Charles's test is the hardest because it requires him to separate duty from personal endurance. Continuing to work can demonstrate resilience. Accepting help can demonstrate judgment. A sovereign does not prove strength by performing every engagement personally. He proves strength by ensuring that the institution continues to function without uncertainty, even when his health requires adjustment. The final verdict is clear. There is no credible public evidence that William uncovered secret schedules proving Camilla concealed medical advice, or that Charles stripped her office of influence and transferred most royal duties to his son. The strongest claims remain unsupported, and several dramatic details depend on access and procedures that have not been established. But the controversy touches a genuine question that will not disappear. Is the palace preparing for continuity early enough? Or does the symbolism of succession make every practical handover more difficult than it needs to be? Charles is still working. William is already preparing. Camilla remains at the king's side. Catherine is supporting a future that is approaching at a pace nobody can fully control. The danger is not that one secret folder will destroy the monarchy. The danger is that love, loyalty, privacy, and succession could pull in different directions until ordinary decisions begin to look like hidden warfare. Share your verdict in the comments.